In the winter of 2017, a man named Chris Holloway sat on a cold sidewalk in downtown Portland while evening traffic passed without noticing him. His jacket was torn, his hands trembled from the freezing air, and everything he owned was packed into a single worn backpack resting beside his feet. People walked past him as if he were invisible, just another quiet figure blending into the city's background. But 5 years earlier, Chris Holloway had been living a completely different life. Back then he had a steady job, a small apartment overlooking a quiet street, and a routine that gave his days structure and meaning. He had coworkers who trusted him, neighbors who greeted him by name, and friends he believed would always remain part of his life. Among those friends was Tyler Mason, someone Chris once described as the closest friend he had ever had. Tyler was confident, charismatic, and always seemed to know exactly what to say when life felt uncertain. For years, Chris trusted him without question. But according to Chris, Tyler Mason didn't simply watch his life fall apart. He helped push it there. Because the road that carried Chris from a stable life to sleeping on the streets of Portland did not begin with a dramatic mistake. It began with something that seemed harmless at the time, a single pill offered by someone he trusted. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. At first glance, Chris Holloway and Tyler Mason looked like ordinary friends. They met during their second year of college after being introduced by a mutual classmate at a crowded weekend gathering where students were trying to forget the pressure of exams and the uncertainty of life after graduation. Chris was quiet and steady, someone who preferred routine and long-term plans. Tyler Mason was different. Tyler walked into rooms with confidence, started conversations with strangers easily, and had a way of making ordinary stories sound exciting. Over time, their friendship grew naturally. They played basketball on weekends, talked about careers and relationships, and spent long evenings discussing the future they imagined building for themselves. To anyone watching from the outside, their friendship looked completely normal. But years later, after Chris Holloway's life began unraveling in ways that shocked the people who once knew him as responsible and dependable, questions began to appear. Why did Chris change so suddenly after years of living a careful life? Why was Tyler Mason always nearby when things seemed to get worse? And why did Chris later insist the entire downward path had been quietly encouraged by the person he trusted most? Because sometimes the people who ruin your life are not strangers. Sometimes they are the ones standing closest to you. Chris Holloway grew up in a quiet suburb outside Phoenix where life followed a steady rhythm. From an early age, he became comfortable with routines. After finishing college, he found a stable job in logistics where organization and reliability mattered more than anything else. Chris liked knowing what his days would look like. He paid his rent on time, woke up early for work, and built his life around responsibility and stability. Friends described him as dependable, sometimes even cautious when making important decisions. But beneath that careful personality was something else that would eventually matter more than any routine. Chris trusted people easily. When someone earned his friendship, he rarely questioned their intentions. Tyler Mason entered Chris's life with a completely different energy. Where Chris valued stability, Tyler thrived on excitement and possibility. Tyler had a natural charm that made strangers feel comfortable immediately. He talked about big opportunities, quick success, and stories of people who transformed their lives overnight through bold decisions. Some of those stories were exaggerated, but Tyler told them with such confidence that few people questioned them. Listening to Tyler made ordinary possibilities sound extraordinary, and that confidence had a strong influence on the people around him, especially Chris Holloway. The first real shift in Chris's life happened during a weekend party that seemed ordinary at the time. It was the kind of crowded apartment gathering where music echoed through every room and people moved between conversations with drinks in their hands. Tyler Mason thrived in environments like that. Late in the night, Tyler reached into his pocket and placed a small pill into Chris's hand. "Relax," Tyler said. "It'll help you unwind." Chris hesitated. He had never taken anything like that before. Tyler laughed and brushed away the concern. "Everyone does it." Chris trusted him. After that night, the change didn't happen suddenly. It happened slowly. Tyler introduced Chris to new people and late-night gatherings that lasted until morning. At first, Chris believed it was temporary fun, a short break from the routine he had followed for years. But the nights grew longer and the invitations came more often. Slowly, the structure of Chris's life began slipping away. He started missing workdays. Rent payments arrived late. Family members noticed changes in his voice during phone calls. Through it all, Tyler remained close, always reassuring Chris that nothing was as serious as it seemed. Years later, Chris described something disturbing about that period. Every time his life became more unstable, Tyler Mason seemed to be nearby offering advice. When Chris lost his job after missing too many days of work, Tyler framed it as an opportunity. When Chris began falling behind on rent, Tyler suggested moving somewhere cheaper. Eventually, Chris moved into a small apartment Tyler recommended in a neighborhood he had never visited before. The environment felt completely different from the life he once knew. Old routines disappeared. Friendships weakened. Family conversations became shorter. Yet one detail would later trouble Chris more than anything else. While his life unraveled piece by piece, Tyler Mason never appeared affected by the chaos. Tyler continued talking about new plans and opportunities as if nothing around him had changed. The breaking point came during a winter night in 2017. By then, Chris had lost his job and most of his savings. The small apartment Tyler suggested had become the last fragile piece of a life that was falling apart. One evening, the landlord arrived with a notice that could no longer be ignored. The rent had fallen too far behind. Within hours, Chris found himself carrying his belongings onto the sidewalk while the door closed behind him. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to go. Instinctively, Chris called the one person who had always seemed to have an answer: Tyler Mason. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. Chris tried again. No answer. Sitting there in the cold, a realization slowly formed in his mind. Nearly every decision that had led him to that moment had begun with Tyler's encouragement. Months later, Chris learned something unsettling. Tyler Mason had moved to another city and started a new life. According to people who knew him there, Tyler often told a story about a former friend who had ruined his own life through bad decisions. That friend was Chris Holloway. In Tyler's version of events, Chris was not someone influenced or encouraged. He was simply an example of someone who could not handle the consequences of his choices. Stories like the one involving Chris Holloway and Tyler Mason raise uncomfortable questions about trust. Betrayal rarely looks obvious in the beginning. It happens gradually, suggestion by suggestion, choice by choice, until the person experiencing it no longer recognizes how far they have moved from the life they once knew. Which raises a troubling question. If someone in your life was quietly leading you toward destruction, would you recognize the signs while it was happening? Or would you only understand the truth when it was already too late? Have you ever seen someone influenced by the wrong friend? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy psychological stories about manipulation, deception, and the hidden patterns behind human behavior, subscribe to Beneath the Surface Stories, because the next story might be even more disturbing.